On today's episode, I'm reacting to all the Week 5 matchups, plus all the fantasy studs for Week 5, coming right up. What's up, everyone? You're listening to the Gridiron Fantasy Football Podcast for Monday, October 12th, 2020. And I'm Chip, and I'm your host, and thank you so much for joining us today. If you're a new listener, thank you so much for joining us as well. If you'd like to share our podcast, you can find us over on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and Amazon Music. If you'd like to watch us, you can watch us over on YouTube at Gridiron Fantasy Football. So please help support the show and subscribe so you don't miss any more episodes. So crazy week in Week 5. Today we're going to be going over all the Week 5 matchups, all the fantasy studs for Week 5. But obviously I think we have to start off with the biggest news that took place in Week 5. Dak Prescott, unfortunately, is out for the rest of the season. If you didn't see it on Sunday, he dislocated and had a compound fracture to his right ankle. If you saw the play live, it was just a horrific injury that you witnessed. It's hard to watch injuries like that. And we saw that he tried to do some ankle reduction on the field when he was trying to get his ankle back in place. But just a awful scene for the Dallas Cowboys. And my heart goes out to Dak Prescott. And just, he's based on the reports that I've read and just watching interviews and all that stuff, Dak Prescott is by far a very good human being. He has a good head on his shoulders, and he's a great leader for the Dallas Cowboys. You saw when he went down, just the emotion of all the players knowing how devastating this injury is to their team, to him. I mean, I know a lot of people give crap about a lot of players wanting to hold out for more money and wanting these big contracts, but you have to look at what happened yesterday as a prime example on why players want their money. And I'm always going to be for players always wanting to get their money because of things like that. Because his injury, he had surgery last night, so there's not going to be any reason why Dak Prescott can't come back for 2021. He's going to come back. He'll have to rehab for about 4 to 6 months. He has a good amount of time to get himself back into shape. But it looks like, with the surgery, he'll be, probably non-weight bearing for about, 6 to 8 weeks based on the doctor's protocol. And then he'll get up to, doing rehab. And then hopefully within the next 4 to 6 months, he'll be back to doing a lot of football related drills and everything. But, it really shows that how important Dak Prescott is to the Dallas Cowboys. He is their franchise. He's everything to that organization. So I hope that that team gives him a contract to make him a Cowboy for life, because it is one of those things where it's hard to see, it's hard to watch. We're fantasy football analysts and we play fantasy football, and we have to realize we have to humanize these players a little bit, because you saw what happened to Dak Prescott, and you just have to wonder, these guys, you guys don't realize what these guys go through. I've been very fortunate in my career to work with NFL athletes at the physical therapy level. And I saw for 4 years when I worked with these guys how hard they work to get back from injury. And people don't realize they work their asses off to make sure that they are 100% good to go for their teams. Their body is it's everything to them. That's why you see people like Russell Wilson spend so much money on their body, Tom Brady, LeBron James. They know if they're able to maintain a high level of function and mobility and strength, and they're going to be able to perform to the highest level. And Dak Prescott, I wish I was able to watch his rehab process from the therapist and the trainer's point of view, because I know this guy's going to work his ass off to get back to the field and be everything to that Dallas Cowboys franchise. So my prayers and thoughts go to Dak Prescott. I hope he has a healthy recovery. It's good that he had surgery last night to avoid any type of setback or infection or anything like that. But it just sucks to see. I hate seeing players, go through a horrific injury like that, and just seeing the emotion on his face when he left the field it's devastating. It just deflates the actual team, the atmosphere, the stadium. I think the Cowboys had 25,000 people in that stadium yesterday. and it was dead silent, and it just sucks to see. But positive thoughts to Dak Prescott. I know he'll come back stronger than ever, and he'll do a great job next year. And on the flip side, to that being the worst news of Week 5, to one of the uplifting stories of Week 5 was Alex Smith. Alex Smith has not played football in 2 years. He dealt with a different injury than Dak Prescott, a more life-threatening and career-ending injury. And if you guys watched the Washington game against the Rams, Kyle Allen went out early. He got hit, and Alex Smith came into the game. And I got goosebumps watching that. I follow some of what Alex Smith was doing. I follow there's a E60 episode on Alex Smith that ESPN did, and just a remarkable story. And to see his wife and kids in the stands, not knowing that he's going to play. He was activated yesterday because it looks like Dwayne Haskins was had like a stomach illness or something like that, so he wasn't at the stadium, so he was inactive. But then Alex Smith came into the game, and seeing the emotion of his wife and his kids, and just it's unbelievable to see a guy who went through so much, went through 17 surgeries to come back and play snaps and get hit. I mean, I got goosebumps. I think everybody how can you not root for Alex Smith? As a football fan, as if you're a Washington fan, or even a Chiefs fan, a 49ers fan, just watching Alex Smith's career and watching what he has done to get back to the field and make a point to his kids that if you work hard enough, you'll achieve your goals and all that stuff. And just a remarkable just story from Alex Smith. And it was great to see him, actually in a game play. And, it was awesome. And then going to some team news, the Atlanta Falcons have fired Dan Quinn and the GM. This was kind of inevitable. We saw that ever since they lost the Super Bowl, the Falcons have not been the same. They're on an 0-5 start so far this year. They just look deflated, and it's just frustrating. It's frustrating to see a team that has so much talent not be able to win games, and they're losing games when they had leads. I mean, it's just unfortunate because you hate seeing coaches being fired midway through the season. But it was Arthur Blank, the owner of the Falcons. They felt like, okay, this is the decision that we need to make after 5 weeks. Now they have made Raheem Morris the interim head coach for the Atlanta Falcons. If you don't know who Raheem Morris was or is, he used to be the head coach for the Tampa Bay Bucks. So the Bucks had John Gruden, and then Monty Kiffin. So Raheem Morris was a defensive backs coach for the Bucks in the mid 2000s, and he was an up and coming coach. He was a guy that people wanted to hire for a head coaching position, and then Monty Kiffin had left the Tampa Bay Bucks as a defensive coordinator, and then they made Raheem Morris the defensive coordinator. But then just a month later, they fired John Gruden. So they made Raheem Morris he was one of the youngest head coaches in the league, and he was the coach for the Bucks for a couple years, and then they fired him. They went with Greg Schiano. But Raheem Morris is a guy that I think will spark some type of being a player's coach. I think that he'll be able to be. Honestly, I think he wasn't a very good head coach when he was a coach for the Bucks. I think that he was kind of thrown into that situation, but I do think that he'll be able to spark the Falcons to a degree where I think they'll get rejuvenated. I don't know how that's going to play out when it comes to wins and losses, but I do think that the morale could be a little bit better based on a different approach that he brings. So he definitely is a player's coach, but we'll see. I mean, he hasn't been a head coach in 10 years now, so I think that he'll definitely bring a different just swag to that team. But yeah, so that's the main the main news for Week 5. Just a crazy week of just different stories, highs and lows. So at the top of every podcast for Mondays, I like going through all the top plays based on next gen stats. And this week, starting off with the fastest ball carrier, it belongs to the Panthers wide receiver DJ Moore. He was able to get a top speed of 21.52 miles per hour on his 57-yard reception. Last week we saw a cornerback for the Chargers get the top spot on his pick 6, but this week it belongs to DJ Moore. And then going to the longest play, Isaiah Rodgers of the Colts had a 101-yard kickoff return for a touchdown. He had to run 135 total yards to do that. I do believe this is our very first kickoff return of 2020. If I'm wrong, just leave a comment and let me know, because I do believe this is the only kickoff return we've had so far. And then when it comes to the improbable completion, this belongs to Kyler Murray. He threw a 45-yard pass to DeAndre Hopkins. It only had a completion percentage of 10.6%, so a little bit lower than we had last week, but still crazy to think like some of these passes that seem uncatchable and what the percentage is when it comes to like what's the percentage of being a completed pass. And then going to the remarkable rushes. So yesterday, Miles Sanders had a 74-yard touchdown rush, and he was only expected to get 4 yards on the play, ended up making it, the 74, so he had 70 yards over expected. So that's always an interesting stat to see, like, where a play is almost dead in its tracks and minimal gain, and then he rushed, over 70 yards of expected. So interesting stat there. Then also when it comes to the fastest sack, this goes to Aaron Donald of the Rams. He sacked the quarterback at 2.17 seconds. Dude's a monster. He had a monster game yesterday. He had 4 sacks yesterday against Washington. So crazy stat there. But those are all the top plays for week 5. So let's go into all the reactions to all the games. So let's start off with I'm going to start off with the Sunday Night Football game. So last night we had the Vikings at Seattle. And Seattle won this game at the last minute, 27-26. The Vikings had a chance to get a first down. They were in the red zone of the Seattle Seahawks. They had a chance. They're 4-1. They had a chance to get a first. They could have kicked a field goal or try for a first down to kind of keep the clock going and then kick a field goal. They decided to go and run the ball. Madison was the guy that ran the ball. He got stopped at the line, so gave Russell Wilson a chance to go the length of the field to score a touchdown and win. Russell Wilson did. I think Russell Wilson is starting to become like the best closer in football. I mean, other than Patrick Mahomes, Russell Wilson is just a monster right now. He has 19 total touchdowns this year, and this guy is he's a monster. I mean, it's hard to deny him right now. He's on a bye week next week, but Russell Wilson continues to show why he's the leading candidate for MVP, but just having a massive season. When it comes to Russell Wilson, I mean, he had a quiet first half. He didn't really do much, but I do think that, obviously it was the weather here in Seattle. It was rainy, it's cold, it was windy, but Russell Wilson had a great second half. He still had, he had 3 touchdown passes. Kirk Cousins, he had a real quiet game. He's a guy that still cannot get it done in prime time, but he had 2 touchdown passes. So if you played him in fantasy, he didn't really kill you. I mean, there was a lot of low fantasy scores for quarterbacks this week, but Kirk Cousins definitely had an average game. And then when it comes to, the running backs, Dalvin Cook was on fire for the Minnesota Vikings last night and completely was just dominating this whole game. He had, almost 20 fantasy points before half. And then he comes back in the second half, and then he gets a reception. He goes out. Looks like he has a groin injury, so we don't know the severity. I was still waiting to hear on the MRI results to determine the severity of it. But Alexander Madison had a great game. He came in relief, had 112 yards rushing. So if you're a Dalvin Cook owner and you don't have Madison on your bench, you need to grab him. The waivers should be going through on Wednesday night rather than Tuesday night. But I'll be talking about Madison more tomorrow in the waiver wire show. But great game in relief for the Vikings. So Adam Thielen had a good game. He had 80 yards and 2 touchdowns. DK Metcalf, he continues to be dominant. Has 6 receptions for 93 yards and that 2 touchdowns plus that game-winning touchdown. So in the beginning of the season and even in the offseason when I was doing the podcast, I had DK Metcalf as a must-own wide receiver. I felt like, in my own estimation, I felt like DK Metcalf was going to emerge to be the number 1 wide receiver for the Seahawks. I understand that he's definitely has Tyler Lockett there, but right now DK Metcalf is the only wide receiver to have 90 yards or more in 5 straight weeks. So DK Metcalf is being a huge presence, and I think he continues that trend. I think that he has continues to have a great season, and he definitely is on pace to be one of those top 5 wide receivers this year in fantasy. But great game from him. And then Chris Carson, not a bad game. He had 52 yards. He had a touchdown, so he didn't kill you this week in fantasy. But overall, I mean, the Vikings, they're 1-4, and they just lost possibly Dalvin Cook for a few weeks. But unfortunately, this is just the nature of it, and hopefully Dalvin Cook can come back pretty strong. And then moving on to the Falcons versus the Panthers. So the Panthers were favored in this game. Panthers won 23-16. Teddy Bridgewater had a massive game. DJ Moore had a massive game. Robbie Anderson had a great game. So everything we expected from a fantasy standpoint, the Falcons are one of the worst defenses in the league. We saw that happen yesterday with the Panthers. So they had a great outing. Matt Ryan continues to struggle. Matt Ryan did not have a passing touchdown yet again this week. Matt Ryan has not had a passing touchdown in 11 quarters. The last touchdown pass he threw was to Hayden Hurst, and that was in that game against Chicago. So definitely worrisome if you're a Matt Ryan owner. Definitely if you have anybody on the Atlanta Falcons. I mean, Calvin Ridley had a great game. Calvin Ridley had 136 yards yesterday, so he had a bad game on Monday night, came back with a strong outing this week. And then Todd Gurley had a great game, had 121 yards rushing and a touchdown. So I was surprised on how he looked. I mean, he definitely looked like Todd Gurley of old. Don't know how that sustains throughout the rest of the season, but definitely a good game from him. And then, like I said, Mike Davis continues to be a great asset for the Carolina Panthers. I mean, Christian McCaffrey is trying to test out his ankle today, kind of see if they're able to take him off IR, but a great game from Mike Davis once again. And then when it comes to the Raiders, going on to the Raiders and the Chiefs, this was the upset of the week, right? The Raiders are, one of those teams that they're not dominating you, but they're 3-2, so they're definitely a playoff caliber team. They go and beat the Chiefs at Arrowhead 40-32, and very surprising. I mean, the Chiefs looked out of sync yesterday, and I don't want to say it's a Super Bowl hangover yet because they're still a good team. They're only 4-1, so it's not like they're having a horrible season. But just the offense, I mean, we look at Patrick Mahomes. He had 3 touchdowns. We're like, oh, that's a bad game from Patrick Mahomes, but it really wasn't from a fantasy standpoint. He still had 340 yards and 2 touchdowns and a rushing touchdown. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, he didn't really have a massive game. He had 40 yards, and then he had 40 yards rushing and 40 yards receiving. Derek Carr, he had a good game. He had 347 yards, 3 touchdowns, and this might be a minority type of response, or I might be in the minority when it comes to Derek Carr, but I've always liked Derek Carr. Always felt like he's underappreciated. I just felt like, just like Dak Prescott, I feel like there's when it comes to fantasy and what value he has. I talked to this about my barber here in the Seattle area. He's a huge Oakland Raiders fan. Well, now the Las Vegas Raiders. And I always talk about how if Derek Carr has people around him, he has talent around him, he is a good quarterback. And especially when it comes to fantasy, I understand that he had a couple bad seasons, but I feel like if you put talent around Derek Carr, he's going to flourish. And look what's happening. You have Jacobs, you have Waller, Henry Ruggs had a good game yesterday. You have Renfro in the slot. I just think that Derek Carr just is very underappreciated, and I feel like this is a team that can't be overlooked. So the Raiders definitely had a great game yesterday. Josh Jacobs had another good game. He had 77 yards on the ground he had 2 touchdowns, and Henry Ruggs, like I mentioned, he had 2 receptions for 118 yards. So yes, he had a quiet game in the sense of how many receptions he got, but he made do with the 118 yards, and he had a long touchdown. The long came for 72 yards. For the Chiefs, Travis Kelce had a great game. He had 8 receptions for 108 yards and a touchdown. He had 12 targets. So him and Tyreek Hill continued to be the 1 and 2. Sammy Watkins went out early with a hamstring injury, but those 2 guys continue to be fantasy forces. I mean, Tyreek Hill has scored in every week so far, so you can't be mad about that. But it's just one of those things where the Chiefs will come back, and they'll come back stronger, and then they'll figure things out. But it just looks like that they're not in sync right now. It seems like ever since they played the Patriots, they just don't seem like themselves. But they'll turn it on at some point. And then going to the Cardinals versus the Jets, this was kind of a favorable game for the Cardinals. They won 30-10. Kyler Murray had a good game. He had 380 yards passing. He had 2 total touchdowns. So good game from him. Kenyon Drake finally scored. Got you some fancy points this week. DeAndre Hopkins, he had a good game, 131 yards and a touchdown. When it comes to the Jets, Jameson Crowder continues to be the fancy asset to have on the Jets. He continues to have over 100 yards and a touchdown in the last couple games. So like, he definitely is a good flex type of player, maybe like a wide receiver too. But it seems like Jamison Crowder is going to be the guy to play on the Jets team. But when it comes to like Le'Veon Bell did not have a very good game. He had about 7.7 fantasy yards, and if you're in PPR, he had 7.7 points. Just not a good game from Le'Veon Bell. It's just weird. It's just weird to see a guy who's been so dominant in fantasy in the years prior to the Jets, and then just can't do anything. So I don't know if that's a talent thing. I don't know if it's a Adam Gase situation, but overall, just not a good game for the Jets offensively. Other than Jameson Crowder was the only bright spot. Then moving on to the Eagles versus Steelers. The Steelers won this game 38-29. This was a pretty good game. Carson Wentz, he had 258 yards and 2 touchdowns, but continues to turn over the ball. Big Ben, good game from him. He had 3 touchdown passes. Miles Sanders, I benched him in my main league for James Robinson, and he ended up showing up with 24 PPR points. He had 80 yards and 2 touchdowns. And then there are 2 stories of this game right now. The main story of this game is Chase Claypool, right? So Chase Claypool is lower on the depth chart only because they got Juju, they got Deontay Johnson, they got James Washington there. But yesterday, Chase Claypool just was a force in fantasy last night and yesterday. So he had 7 receptions for 110 yards and 3 receiving touchdowns. Then he added a rushing touchdown to this. So obviously Chase Claypool is a talented player. We always thought that he was going to be a decent asset to the Steelers. We didn't know exactly how that was going to play out. But Deontay Johnson yesterday went out early with a back injury. So obviously when Juju gained most of the attention, made an opening for Chase Claypool to do some work yesterday. So Chase Claypool had a great game. And on the other side of the ball for the Eagles, Travis Fulgham, he had a great game. It's the second good game he had in a row for the Eagles. He had 152 yards. He had 10 receptions on 13 targets. So this is definitely a guy to kind of monitor. But we do know that once Alshon Jeffrey comes back, Deshaun Jackson comes back, and then Jalen Reagor comes back, this may be a guy that gets just buried on the depth chart. But as of right now, until those players come back, this might be a guy you want to consider. But this is good for Carson Wentz to have somebody that he can go to, because he definitely doesn't have the receivers right now. But overall, great game from the receivers for both teams. And obviously Juju didn't have a good game, but I think that's going to be what it is with Juju. Juju is going to get most of the attention, and with that being the case, that's going to let other receivers for the Steelers, flourish. So, but when it comes to like the tight end position, Eric Ebron, he had a decent game. He was 5 for 43. He had 6 targets, and if you look at the landscape of what tight ends were this week, it's just a crap show right now. Like, it's hard to find, other than having like Kittle, Ertz, or even Ertz had a bad game, but having some of these main tight ends and Kelsey, like it's just a crapshoot for tight ends right now. And hopefully you're fortunate enough to have some of those top guys, because trying to stream tight ends is very difficult. All right, going on to the Rams versus Washington. The Rams won this game easily, 30-10. Like I said, the biggest story of this game was Alex Smith returning to football after 2 years. He had a quiet game, didn't really do much, but it was good to see. But then it looks like Ron Rivera came out on Monday and said, if Kyle Allen is healthy to go, he's going to be the starter. So it was good to see Alex Smith. But Alex Smith is not really 100% there to be taken over as a starter. But I do think Alex Smith gets his moment again at some point of the season. Jared Goff had a good game. He had 309 yards and 2 touchdowns. Cam Akers led the backfield for the Rams with 9 carries for 61 yards. Darrell Henderson had the touchdowns, right? But Akers had the yardage. So it's just this backfield. And then Malcolm Brown had 8 carries. So I dropped Malcolm Brown yesterday. They picked up Dearness Johnson, because Dearness Johnson is still on waivers in my league. So I went and picked him up, and I dropped Malcolm Brown. So I don't want to play this Russian roulette type of mentality for the Rams backfield. I just want to try to get as best players I can who's going to have the most upside. So that's why I did that. But Malcolm Brown, he had 8 carries. And the interesting thing about this, when it comes to tight end, Gerald Everett, he had 4 receptions for 90 yards yesterday. So with that being the case, I think that we thought Tyler Higbee was going to be this breakout star this year. And then you're looking at his snaps are lowering, Gerald Everett's snaps are increasing, and now you're seeing Gerald Everett now shine. So it's like, you're in that position. Do I drop Higbee, or do I, what do I do? So very interesting to kind of see that kind of emerging with the Rams. On the Washington side of the ball, McLaurin had a very quiet game, didn't really do much. Gibson, he was all right yesterday from a PPR standpoint, but overall, Washington had a very quiet game, and they just played a defense. I mean, a defense that sacked the quarterback. I mean, Aaron Donald alone had 4 sacks. So I mean, you can't really do much when you have no time to throw the ball. Alex Smith hasn't played in 2 years, so he's a little jittery in the pocket. So that being the case, I mean, this was just a bad game overall for Washington. And moving on to the Bengals versus the Ravens, this was an awful game for the Bengals. The Ravens won this game easily, 27-3. Joe Burrow, I like him. He's one of my starting quarterbacks. He has to be one of my starting quarterbacks because I play in the 2-quarterback league. He got me under 6 points yesterday. He was sacked like 7 times yesterday. Just couldn't do anything. Fumbled the ball twice. Lost one of the fumbles. Threw an interception. This is the growing pains on being a rookie quarterback going against a stout defense like the Ravens. And then you have no offensive line help. A.J. Brown was not a contributor yesterday. He went out early with a hamstring injury. But T. Higgins had he had over 10 points from a PPR standpoint, so you can't get mad at that. Tyler Boyd was on the quiet side. Joe Mixon had about 15 PPR points. So overall, this offense just didn't do much yesterday. Marquise Brown on the Ravens side of the ball did well. He had 6 receptions for 77 yards and a touchdown. And just like the Rams backfield, this backfield for the Ravens is hard to predict. So just overall, just kind of one of those things where I'm just gonna stay off the Ravens backfield for now. But overall, I mean, Mark Andrews had a decent game yesterday too. So I think the Ravens offense, it's weird because like Lamar Jackson, he did throw for 2 touchdown passes, but we're not seeing the same Lamar Jackson from last year. I think that was really expected though. It was expected to see Lamar Jackson maybe take a regression, maybe in the rushing ability and whatnot, but I felt like he would flourish as a passer, and he didn't really have to do much. I mean, they're up 27-3, so it's not like they won the game 27-3, so it wasn't like they had to do a lot to win the game, but Lamar Jackson continues to be one of those guys where when you look at we drafted him at compared to what value you're getting from him, definitely overspent. Then moving on to the Jags and the Texans, this is a game where the Texans, they fired their coach, and hopefully this was going to be a game that they were going to come out and win and be strong in, and they won 30-14. Deshaun Watson had a great game. He had 3 touchdowns. David Johnson, he had almost 100 yards rushing, so not a bad game from David Johnson. And this was the most interesting thing about it is Brandon Cooks. Brandon Cooks was probably dropped in every league, right? He had 0 points last week, and Brandon Cooks comes and has 8 receptions for 161 yards and a touchdown. Had over 30 PPR points. Like, that has to be infuriating to the people who drafted Brandon Cooks, dropped him, and then now have to reclaim him because of a game that he had yesterday. So just a very frustrating, probably to the ownership, like the owners that had Brandon Cooks. And then on the Jags side of the ball, James Robinson was one of those must starts for me this week. I felt like the match, I benched Miles Sanders for James Robinson, and I felt like that was a great play because the Texans were awful against the run, and James Robinson has been getting the majority of the work for the Jags. But then I was watching the red zone yesterday and watched some of that game. Like, it was frustrating because he came out pretty strong in the beginning of the game, and he ended up having only 10 PPR points. He lost the fumble because they tried to do a wildcat. He tried to pass the ball. He fumbled it, and then he just wasn't what I expected yesterday, and it was frustrating, but it's the way it is. And then DJ Chark went out early in this game because of an injury, but then it kind of elevated Laviska Shenault because I played him in my league as well, and he got 15 PPR points, so you can't be mad at that. So overall, just a down game for the Jags, but I think they'll bounce back. Now moving on to the Dolphins and the 49ers. Man, this was another unexpected game yesterday. The Dolphins beat the 49ers at home, so they're in San Francisco, and beat the 49ers 43-17. And just another great game from Ryan Fitzmagic, right? You had 350 yards and 3 touchdowns. Like, he knows he's on borrowed time, and he just continues to just ball out. And I love watching this guy play. It's just so much more, such fun to watch. You can tell he enjoys the game, and just a great game from Ryan Fitzpatrick. Raheem Mostert, I was concerned about him, but I didn't realize how his snaps were going to be going into this game. I felt like Jerick McKinnon has done enough to keep the starting of his job for now until Raheem Mostert was able to become fully healthy and take over the workload. But he had 90 yards on 11 carries, so it wasn't like he had a bad game. But it's one of those things now if you're a Mostert owner and you are kind of concerned about what do I do with him, you have to start him now. He's going to take over that starting role again. I think Jarrett McKinnon now becomes the second running back on the depth chart, but overall, not a bad outing for him. The whole 49ers offense just had a bad game yesterday. And then what's interesting about this game, so Preston Williams, he had 106 yards and a touchdown on 4 receptions. And what's frustrating about this game, right, is that I dropped Preston Williams in all my leagues. I had Preston Williams in almost all my leagues. I dropped him because I was getting frustrated with the lack of production. And as soon as I dropped this guy, just like whoever owned Brandon Cooks, this guy comes out and has 106 yards and a touchdown. So, and Devontae Parker had a good game as well. Not as good as, he had a touchdown as well, but not as good as Preston Williams. But it's just funny how that works sometimes. But Preston Williams had a good game. Myles Gaskins had a good game. He had 57 yards rushing and a touchdown. He had another 5 receptions for 34 yards. So I think the floor is very healthy for Myles Gaskins. I know that he doesn't play on a high-powered offense, but he continues to be a guy that's valuable in PPR leagues because of the receptions and the floor that he has. So good game from Myles Gaskin. And then when it comes to on the 49ers side of the ball, I mean, Jimmy Garoppolo, he looked awful yesterday. And I think they played him a little bit too early. He's coming back from a high ankle sprain, and it just looked like he was very jittery. He was just not confident in his this looked like he just was not confident yesterday. It looked like he was trying to do too much. He didn't have it. When you have an ankle injury and you're a quarterback, a lot of people, they generate their power from their legs. So if you're unable to plant your feet, set, and throw, it really is going to be hindering to your throwing power, your accuracy. The ball is going to sail. So I just felt like Jimmy Garoppolo might have came back a week too early, but he got pulled because obviously his performance was lacking, but I don't think that they're going to bench now Jimmy Garoppolo. I believe that he's going to start next week, but I think that they just needed to see. Even Kyle Shanahan had said, like, I think it was a little bit too early to put him back on the field, but it just looked like he wasn't healthy. He was just very unsure of himself. It didn't look like I said, he wasn't confident throwing the ball. So bad game from Jimmy Garoppolo, but he's your franchise right now. You paid him, so he's going to be the starter. I can't imagine that they're going to bench him for C.J. Beathard. So we'll see. But from a receiving standpoint, quiet game from Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle. You had Kendrick Bourne did have the touchdown, but overall, just a bad overall, fancy outing for the wide receivers for the 49ers. But at the tight end position for the Dolphins, Mike Gesicki had a good game, so you got some good value there for tight end. And when it comes to the Colts and Browns, the Browns won this game 32-23. Baker Mayfield in the beginning of this game in the first half was surgical. He had 2 touchdowns. He was looking great. Kareem Hunt looked great. And then you look at the second half, and then it was just a tale of two halves. Like, he just was not good. The Colts were able to get a defensive touchdown. They got a couple interceptions. I mean, just a overall weird game to watch. I mean, the Browns are 4-1, so kudos to them. But when it comes to, like, they can't have things that happen like that. I think if they played any other team that didn't have Phillip Rivers, I do think like they would have lost that game because Phillip Rivers continues to be, I think, they're hindering and inhibiting this offense because this Colts defense is very underrated and very good. So if you look at what Phillip Rivers is not doing, he's not providing the points for the Colts defense. And if you look at what happened yesterday, I mean, T.Y. Hilton had another quiet game. Phillip Rivers had pretty much a non-existent game. And Jonathan Taylor, he had a touchdown, so that was decent from a fantasy standpoint. But Mo Alley Cox was left with no catches. So just overall, I mean, I'm wondering if it's a time for them to go to Jacoby Brissett because Phillip Rivers he's not protecting the football. They're not scoring the points, and I think that it's at some point they're going to have to pull him. I mean, I like Phillip Rivers overall as a quarterback, but from if you're wanting to win games, I mean, they're 3-2 right now, so there's not like they're by any means out of playoff hopes or anything like that. But if they had played any other team, I think that, or if they had any other quarterback and they're able to, with the offensive weapons they do have, I feel like the Browns would have lost this game. But I don't know, the Colts right now I think are being held back by Phillip Rivers. And then going on to the Cowboys and Giants game. So like I said at the top of the podcast, the biggest news was Dak Prescott being injured. The Giants almost won this game, but the Cowboys won 37-34. Daniel Jones, I mean, from a from a fantasy standpoint, pretty quiet day for him. I mean, he had 222 yards passing, but didn't do much after. Like other than that, had no touchdown. So he was one of those guys that you stream because the matchup was juicy, right? Daniel Jones he was going against a team that has a bad secondary, gives up a bunch of points. I mean, they gave up 34 points, so like it's obvious that the defense side of the ball for the Cowboys is struggling. But if you look at what, from a fantasy standpoint, he was a guy that was a potential streamer for the week because of the matchup. But he didn't do much with the opportunity. Yesterday, before Dak Prescott, went down, he was having a quiet game as well, and then he did have a reception for a touchdown. So they had a trick play that Dak Prescott had scored a touchdown, a receiving touchdown. But when it comes to like Zeke, Zeke had a good game. He had 91 yards and 2 touchdowns. Devontae Freeman. So for the last couple of weeks, I've mentioned Devontae Freeman, this Giants backfield that I wanted to see. I didn't want to play any Giants in the backfield, like their backfield at all, until I saw what exactly was going to be the case. And yesterday, I think we saw finally Devontae Freeman become a player that you could consider to play now based on what he did yesterday. So he had 17 carries for 60 yards and a touchdown. Then he added another 2 receptions for 27 yards. So like, this was a clear cut. This was Devontae Freeman's backfield yesterday because the next Wayne Gallman had five rush attempts. So I think now Devontae Freeman's in football shape. He's going to implement the offense more. He knows more of the offense. So I think that now Devontae Freeman could be considered more of a flex play based on matchups. But definitely a good news for anybody who picked up Freeman on waivers. And then it comes to the receiving. Darius Slayton, he had a good game. He had 8 receptions for 129 yards. So, he was a guy that we felt was going to have a good game this week just because of the matchup. And then I felt like, for the Dallas Cowboys, they had juicy matchups as well. So I was like, play all your Cowboys if you have them. Unfortunately, Amari Cooper didn't do anything yesterday. He had 2 receptions for 23 yards. I'm not really understanding what's going on with him. He's always been this guy that I've always said had these ups and downs of how he does. And then coming into yesterday, he was leading in targets for the Cowboys. And then yesterday, CeeDee Lamb, he had 11 targets. He had 8 receptions for 124 yards. So CeeDee Lamb continues to wreak havoc in the slot. So he's such a mismatch in the slot. And then the problem is the good thing about this is that you have Amari Cooper, you got Gallup, and you got CeeDee Lamb. You can't double cover anybody. If you do, you leave with one of these talented receivers with single coverage, and they're going to exploit that. So a good game overall for CeeDee Lamb and Michael Gallup. And then when it comes to talk a little bit more about the Dak Prescott, and now they're going to Andy Dalton. So Andy Dalton's going to be the starting quarterback going forward for the Dallas Cowboys, which I think is good and bad in a sense, right? So if you're looking at it from a fantasy standpoint, obviously if you are in a 2-quarterback league and Andy Dalton is there on waivers, which he would be, this is a guy that you have to pick up, right? Because he's in an offense that has so many weapons. This is the most weapons he's ever had on any of the teams he ever played with. So but I think that what's concerning about Andy Dalton now, that Dak Prescott is a running quarterback. Dak Prescott has designed plays for QB draws, for sweeps, bootlegs, all that stuff. Their offense is catered around what Dak Prescott can do. Now the problem is the defenses now going forward know that they don't have to be concerned with Andy Dalton running the ball or doing QB draws. It just brings the dynamic of the Cowboys offense a little different. And I do believe that what they're going to have to do is they're going to have to rely on Zeke a lot more because they need to figure out how they're going to be able to make the play action effective. So I don't know how value-wise, I don't know how this is going to hinder, if this is going to be good or bad for either CeeDee Lamb, for Michael Gallup or Amari Cooper, because we don't know exactly what type of relationship Andy Dalton's going to have with the receivers in the sense of who he likes to go to. It looks like, as of yesterday, I don't have all the numbers in front of me, I'm not sure how many times he targeted CeeDee Lamb, but he targeted, in the last drive that won the game for the Cowboys, he targeted Michael Gallup, and Michael Gallup had phenomenal catches. So just one of those games where it's just hard to determine when a starting quarterback like Dak Prescott goes out. You can kind of know how the offense is going to be, but it's going to be interesting to see how Andy Dalton is able to distribute the ball to all these pass catchers and with Zeke on the team. And then you still got Dalton Schultz, right? So does he become more valuable now because of the injury to Dak Prescott? So very interesting to determine how that's going to play out. So those are all the matchups for Week 5. That's all my reactions to Week 5. and then let's go into my fantasy studs for week 5. So at the quarterback position, the three, I always do the top 3 of each week of each position, and Patrick Mahomes still led. He still led in fantasy with 32.4 fantasy points. So the Chiefs lost, but as a fantasy standpoint, Mahomes had a good game still. I mean, he still didn't hurt your team. He probably helped you win a game this week just because of his outing. But Patrick Mahomes led with 32.4. Then Ryan Fitzmagic, he was second. He has 32.1 fantasy points, so just right behind Patrick Mahomes. And with that being the case, I mean, a lot of people probably, I mean, the 49ers are a good defense, so I don't know if you streamed Ryan Fitzpatrick, but he's a guy that definitely had a great game, and he continues to be a streaming option, right? If you need a high risk, high reward type of quarterback for the week based on all the stuff we're dealing with COVID and all the other stuff going on with the injuries taking place, I mean, Ryan Fitzpatrick is a guy that should be rostered because you just never know what can happen to your roster. And then third, Russell Wilson, he has 31.4. So Russell Wilson continues to be a top fantasy performer in the last 5 weeks. He's on a bye week in week 6, so he won't, obviously he won't be in this list, but those are the quarterbacks that were the studs for week 5. And going into the running back position, so Mike Davis, as of right now, as of Monday, we haven't watched the Monday night game, and then we have a Tuesday night game tomorrow. But like Mike Davis, he led with 29.9 PPR points. Great game from Mike Davis. It's a great, like I said earlier, a great substitute for Christian McCaffrey. It's going to stink to see Christian McCaffrey. No, it's not going to stink for Christian McCaffrey to come back. It's going to stink for Mike Davis, knowing how talented he is and what he can do in that offense, to have his touches limited based on Christian McCaffrey coming back at some point. So overall, Mike Davis continues to shine. And then Todd Gurley. This is the first time Todd Gurley has been one of the top running backs for a fantasy week. He had 25 PPR points yesterday. A good game from him. I think that we don't know exactly how this offense is going to look with Raheem Morris as the head coach. I mean, Dirk Cutter's still the offensive coordinator, so obviously that's still going to, I think the offense still stays the same, but I wonder what kind of philosophy that Raheem Morris is going to implement. And then Miles Sanders, he was third with 23.9 PPR points. An unexpected game for him in the sense of like, when you're a fantasy manager and you have options at your running back position like me, I have my 4 running backs are Alvin Kamara, Dalvin Cook, and I have James Robinson and Miles Sanders. Sometimes you just have to play matchups. Sometimes you got to figure out what you're going to do. And yesterday, everything was aligned to have Miles Sanders on my bench because you're playing the Steelers, right? The Eagles' offense has been struggling, and you're going against a team that it generates sacks and pressure and just is good against overall good defense. So Miles Sanders, he showed up yesterday, which is great for him. And then at wide receiver, like I said earlier, Chase Claypool leads this with 42.6 fantasy points. He had 4 touchdowns yesterday. It was his breakout game. It's going to be one of those things where he's going to be one of the top waiver ads for going into week 6. But Chase Claypool had a great game. And then second on this list was Travis Fulgham. This is the Eagles. So in this game, you had 2 of the top fantasy wide receivers for the week. He had 32.2 points this week, so good game from him. And then Brandon Cooks. So Brandon Cooks had 30.1 PPR points. Like I said, unexpected. Didn't really see this. No one saw this coming because, like I said, everyone probably. If you look on your waiver wires right now, I guarantee you Brandon Cooks is in your free agent pool right now. Like, it's just one of those things where people just got frustrated with Brandon Cooks after a goose egg, and he wasn't doing much the rest of the season so far, and he comes out with a 30.1 outing. So good game from Brandon Cooks. Kudos to him. And then at the tight end position, Travis Kelce, he leads this with 24.8 PPR points. And then Mark Andrews was second with 17.6. And then Darren Waller rounds out the top 3 with 15.8 PPR points. So those were the fantasy sets for week 5. Hopefully you weren't going against any of these guys because you probably are in a deficit. So going into Monday night, so we have the Chargers versus the Saints. And then tomorrow night we have the Bills versus the Titans. So some of the news, if you haven't already heard, we were supposed to have the Broncos and the Patriots play tonight. They're supposed to be the early game. It got postponed. So then they're going to play Sunday. So the bye week for the Broncos, they didn't really have a bye week. So their bye week's supposed to be in week 6. So then now they have lost their bye week for the season. And then they have to play the Patriots next weekend. So that game got pushed back. So we only have one game tonight. But with that being the case, what do y'all need to win this week? Because I know for me, in my main league, for me to stay undefeated, I have to have Alvin Kamara needs to score 17.9 fantasy points for me. He's been averaging, he's been having massive games. Michael Thomas is out again because he punched a teammate in the face. So Michael Thomas is out. Jared Cook might be playing. So I feel like if you have Alvin Kamara and you're down by 20, 25 points, I feel like you should be in good situation there where he can probably win your game. But that's what I need. What do you all need? Because we have 2 games left in this week, and so if you chanced it and you played the Bills, any Bills players, any Titans players, that game is still on. Nothing came out today, any more positive cases. So it looks like the Titans and Bills are still on for tomorrow. But like I said, for me to win this week, I need 17.9 PPR points from Alvin Kamara. So leave a comment below and tell me what you need to win. Hopefully y'all are able to win. But that's it for today. Thank you so much for listening today. Please like, comment, and share the podcast and the YouTube. On tomorrow's episode, I'll be going over all my top waiver wire pickups for week 6. So don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss that episode. And if you'd like to follow us on social media, you can find us on Twitter and Facebook at the Gridiron Pod, on Instagram at Gridiron Fantasy Football. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching and listening. We'll see you tomorrow.